CBC News has learned Canada will announce more money today to help Ukraine's military defense. It has to do with those howitzers that were shipped to Ukraine earlier this year. Remember that story? CBC's Murray Brewster is here with all the details. What have you found out, Murray?
Well, Suhana, the Canadian government is going to be spending $9 million on replacement barrels for the howitzers that were sent over to Ukraine a little earlier this spring. The howitzers are guns that are meant to be fired quite regularly, but the barrels need to be changed, especially if they've been fired more than up to 2,500 times. And you would expect, because of the intensity of the fighting that's been taking place in eastern Ukraine, that the guns are being used quite regularly. And this is not an unexpected bit of supply that has had to go to Ukraine in handing over these guns, there were 4 of them, as CBC News reported earlier this spring, that there's going to have to be some sort of maintenance. It is part of the regular maintenance. The $9 million is coming out of the $500 million that the Canadian government set aside in its budget for military support for Ukraine.
And this news comes the same day we expect to hear the U.S. announce a huge infusion of money, Murray, to support Ukraine. How do you compare the two? I mean, Canada's contribution, how does it look against the U.S. contribution?
Well, on a day like this, when the U.S. is announcing $1 billion and $9 million, the political optics may not be necessarily great, but I think that the government is going to point out the fact that it has set aside $500 million within this year's budget to help Ukraine militarily. We've not seen a whole lot of spending coming out of that $500 million pot so far. There has been a substantial amount of artillery ammunition that the government plans to purchase for Ukraine. Where that delivery is of the ammunition remains to be seen, because a lot of the reports coming out of eastern Ukraine are saying that the Ukrainian military is having to conserve artillery ammunition and conserve shells because it doesn't have enough of it. So that is the main priority. But what is the government going to be spending in addition to supplying ammunition? There's been talk about sending more armored vehicles. There has been talk about other pieces of equipment, but we've not seen anything concrete in terms of announcement. I'll be most interested to see whether the U.S. $1 billion is going to come with an itemized list of equipment that the Americans want to send to Ukraine.
And Murray, just before I let you go, I have to ask you about a Canadian who has been wounded in Ukraine. What's the latest on that?
Well, there is a Canadian volunteer. We are identifying him only as JT for security purposes at this time, but he is a former combat engineer with 27 years experience in the Canadian military. He went over to Ukraine this spring as a volunteer and was fighting at the front lines, and we did an exclusive interview with him. He was wounded in the Zaporizhzhia region, which is in southern Ukraine, and has been the area of very intense fighting this past spring. He was wounded trying to help 2 wounded comrades. He drove a truck over an anti-tank mine trying to get to them. He has been severely wounded and has been in hospital in western Ukraine for the last couple of weeks. And right at the moment, there is an effort underway to try and get him medically evacuated back to Canada. There's a private GoFundMe campaign that has been set up to try and bring him home. He's going to require more medical treatment, but his injuries were pretty severe, but he did survive. He had injuries to his legs. He had broken bones in his left arm and severe burns. But he's lucky to be alive, and he has a remarkable story because he was a soldier who fought through Afghanistan and was involved in one of the biggest land battles that took place in Afghanistan involving the Canadian military, Operation Medusa, where he barely escaped being strafed by an American A-10 jet, which killed a number of his comrades in 2006.
Well, thank you for the update. I'm sure Canadians will want to know. I thank you for that. Murray, CBC's Murray Brewster in Ottawa.